requests correctly. It's great to see everybody, particularly the week of Christmas. I mean, it humbles me that you all would show up tonight to talk about requests and points. I do have to say, in terms of a Christmas gift, this is not an Xbox we're going to talk about. This is more like socks. And the reason I say that is requests and points are an overlooked aspect of Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure. It doesn't tend to be the topic that people run to. It doesn't tend to be the topic that you see at lots of sessions. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, if you look at Roberts, the motion to reconsider takes up 22 pages in Roberts. The poor parliamentary inquiry doesn't even get its own chapter. It's not even half a page in Roberts. And so, in terms of sexy parliamentary procedure, if I'm allowed to use the word sexy and parliamentary procedure in the same sentence, people don't tend to think of requests. They don't tend to think of points. And that's one of the reasons I was asked to speak tonight about them, because as Barbara already noted, I'm seeing as some of the more experienced people in the associations or organizations that I help as they rotate out, as they retire, as they move on, a younger crowd has come in and they are not nearly as familiar with Robert's Rules of Order or parliamentary procedure. And they tend to throw around things like point of personal privilege and point of order and point of information, which we're going to talk about. They tend to throw around these things, and often they're just using them not as would be expected in a proper meeting. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Before I do that, I want to mention two things. One, I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, and that is intentional. This week of Christmas, and by the way, today was the winter solstice, shortest day of the year. We only get more sunlight as we go away from today. I did not want to get heavy with the parliamentary procedure, so instead we're just going to have a talk about these motions. You are more than welcome to join that conversation by hopping in. I recognize there are people on this call with years of experience in parliamentary procedure and fabulous credentials. Some of you may have presented on one of these topics, and so feel free to chime in as you wish. Instead, we're just going to have a discussion. I'm not going to have a PowerPoint presentation. The other thing I want to mention is I really do appreciate talking to Toastmasters, and that is because, oh my, it's probably been 45 years since I became an ATM, as it was called then, an able Toastmaster. I was active with Gold Mine Club in Concord, North Carolina. Great group of people, great information, great skills taught along the way. I will mention that as part of that, I did come across, for those of you not active with Toastmasters, there used to be a couple of different modules, and there was a parliamentary procedure in action module that had scripts for various aspects of parliamentary procedure. And I know that it's still in a drawer somewhere at my house. So Toastmasters is phenomenal, both from the speaking aspect as well as a lot of people, including me, helped get introduced to parliamentary procedure through Toastmasters. So it is a wonderful organization. With that, let's hop into some points and some requests. The first one I'd like to talk about is raise a question of privilege, which you always hear as point of privilege or point of personal privilege or point of privilege affecting the assembly. I will point out, and I don't mean that in a funny way, I will point out that the word point does not appear before request for a question of privilege. If you want to take a look at the motion, it is in section 19 of Roberts. Again, there is no point in front of it, which I find interesting because my abbreviation for this motion when I'm taking records of meetings is PPP, point of personal privilege. But the word point of personal privilege does not appear in any of the major parliamentary manuals. It also did not appear in the original Roberts. It's just something that people throw around. No one's going to get in trouble for using it, but that's what I hear at a microphone, point of personal privilege. No, that is not the phrase that's used in Roberts. I will point out of all the requests and motions that we're going to talk about tonight, the points and requests, this is the only one that falls into an order of precedence. For those of you who are guests, you may think the word in parliamentary procedure is precedence. It actually is precedence. I know that because Floyd Riddick told me many years ago that I should remember as an attorney that the word precedence is used by attorneys, and that means looking back at some old case and determining what to do now. The phrase in Roberts and how motions are ranked is that some motions have to precede other motions. And so we talk about motions, it's always precedence, not precedence. Well, question of privilege does actually rank in the order of precedence. It's below the motion to set the time at which to adjourn. It's below the motion to adjourn. It's below recess, but it's above everything else. And so it actually has an order and a time at which it can come up. That seems a bit odd because it tends to come up anytime anybody has a concern or a question of any kind. But in a pure Roberts rule world, if you were dealing with a question of precedence and someone made a motion to recess or to adjourn or to set a time for an adjourned meeting, all of those would take priority over the request for a question of privilege. In terms of the types of requests for privilege, as all of you who have done these sorts of classes before, and there are many on this call, there's a point of privilege, and I'm going to call it a point, even though it really is just a request, which is personal. And then there is the one affecting the assembly. Roberts tries to break those down. I'm going to talk about those for just a moment, but I do want to at least mention that typically a request for privilege cannot interrupt a speaker unless it's very urgent. And even then, Robert says that you're not supposed to be allowed to interrupt the speaker once they have actually begun their remarks, unless, and this is a big unless delaying the request would mean that it serves no purpose. That tends to be what most of us see. Typically, when we see a request for privilege, it's something like, hey, the monitors aren't working. Hey, I can't hear what's going on. Hey, the people in the back of the room are too noisy. Would you please tell them to get quiet? In other words, most often we see a question of privilege, it tends to have to do something with something is interfering with my ability to participate in this meeting, and I need it taken care of immediately. And almost always what happens is that the chair takes care of the request. But understand that in Roberts, there are two aspects to this request for a question or raise a question of privilege. There's the request part, and then there's the what if it doesn't get taken care of by the chair? The request is, hey, could somebody see if the monitor's not working? Hey, is something going on with the sound system? Hey, there's too much noise in the back of the room. But if it doesn't get taken care of by the chair, it can turn into a motion. The most common motion that you might see related to a question of privilege is asking that the body, because of something we're about to talk about that could harm this organization if we talked about it in public, that we go into closed session or we go into an executive session. And so going into executive session is actually a question of privilege. And the way it can play out is if the member asked that we go into closed session, the chair said no. A member could move that we go into closed session, and any motion that arises from a question of privilege is just a motion. It's treated just like any other motion. But the request is very high in the order of precedence because the idea is that you need to interrupt and to get something taken care of right away. Again, Roberts distinguishes between privileges of the assembly, and those tend to be things like noise, light, the screen isn't working. Roberts also talks about that there's something that has been offensive to the body by something that someone might have said earlier, or going into executive session. And then there's this weird thing that's to rise for a question of personal privilege that's a little more peculiar. And in fact, I will say that when you look at some of the writings of Roberts and others, some of them say that's not really a thing. I see it as a thing mainly that someone is using it improperly. And what I mean by that is the way that question of privilege gets used wrong the most is by people just using it to make an announcement. I rise to a point of personal privilege. What's your point? I would like to tell everybody that I'm running for vice president of the organization next year, and now let me tell you my credentials. Well, that's fine as an announcement, but that's really not what Roberts is talking about when it talks about a question of privilege. Or question of privilege, yes, what's your point? I would like to wish Dave a happy birthday. That's not really, that's an announcement. Announcements are supposed to be at the end of the meeting. They don't tend to interrupt. And this really doesn't seem to fit within the definition of what would be considered a question of privilege, which is a very specific thing in Roberts and tends to be important. I have a couple of books, as were mentioned earlier by Barbara. I do not get money from the sales of these books. They're not those kinds of books, but I have tried to put a lot of information in them. So tonight, at times, I may read a little bit out of the books because I already figured this out once to try and put it in a book. I will mention, for the benefit of my publishers, that both books, Robert's Rules of Order Fast Track and notes, comments on Robert's Rules Fifth Edition, actually are on sale for the holidays. Great, makes great stocking stuffers. And I've noticed two things. One, you can order the hard copy books on Amazon and they'll be delivered overnight, so they can be very fast. And notes and comments, I'll mention. I see that if you sign up for Kindle, the book is free. So it's worth every single penny because apparently it's worth zero. In terms of notes and comments, I do want to mention a couple of things that I thought were of note. There's a bit of information, and it says, is a question of privilege the device to use to make an announcement or express appreciation? No. Questions of personal privilege arise often, but listen to Roberts himself in parliamentary law. In ordinary societies, it is very seldom that a question of personal privilege can arise. When asked whether there are occasions that justify raising a question of personal privilege, Robert replied, no. So seldom do they occur that I cannot recall a case in my own experience. 90% of the instances of persons rising to a question of personal privilege that I have seen recorded in the proceedings of societies were not questions of privilege. Demeter's manual, which is not used as much anymore, but it's still an excellent study guide but recognize it has not kept up with Roberts as Roberts keeps getting amended every few years. Demeter's says that a question of personal privilege, if you want to remember what it can deal with, the acronym is SHIP, SHIP. And that is because questions of privilege are supposed to deal with issues of safety. They're supposed to deal with the health of the assembly. They're supposed to deal with the integrity of the assembly, or they're supposed to deal with the protection of the property of the assembly. So at least Demeter suggested SHIP was the acronym for how it should be used. To continue for a moment, Demeter's manual begins its discussion of the motion. And again, it's funny people get so emotional about parliamentary procedure. Quote, grave injustices and countless wrongs have been and are constantly being done both to business and to members because of misuse of this proceeding. The motion to raise a question of privilege is one of the least understood and most abused and misapplied motions in parliamentary law. Demeter later lists specific abuses: taking the floor away from a speaker, making some explanation or correcting a misstatement uttered in debate, and rising to a point of order, to a request for information, or to a parliamentary inquiry. The Opinions Committee of the American Institute of Parliamentarians adds that expressions of appreciation do not fall within the purpose of questions of privilege. However, the end of nearly every convention is filled with delegates rising to points of personal privilege to make announcements or to express appreciation for something. Other than possibly thanking the parliamentarian, such announcements are not proper questions of privilege. And those aren't even the most trying misuse, the member who uses the device to drag the assembly through the member's misery. Take, for instance, the delegate who rises to a question of personal privilege to rant that a friend was treated unfairly by the Credentials Committee. The delegate won't make the appropriate motion to challenge the committee, but instead just wishes to gripe to the body. Robert should have heeded his own experience and eliminated questions of privilege. For requests, a parliamentary inquiry could do. For motions, an incidental main motion would suffice. For something objectionable like noise, a point of order could be made. For announcements, most meetings include such a heading in the order of business, which precludes the need to interrupt business with an improper question of privilege. So, with questions of privilege, where I'm going to end, and I joke the authors of Robert sometimes that I'm so glad I don't have that job, because not only do they have to keep an eye on history and not undo what has been done over 150 years with the book. I mean, it's not their job to write a brand new Roberts and to make it this big again. But at the same time, they have to recognize what's going on in the world. This is a tough motion. And the reason I say that is it's odd that it fits into the order of precedence. It's usually misused. Robert didn't like it. Demeter didn't like it. But do recognize that it is a motion. It can interrupt if it's urgent. Almost always it's dealt with by the presiding officer, but if it's not dealt with by the presiding officer, a motion can be made, and then it's treated just like any other motion. Okay, enough ranting about rising to a question of privilege. Let's talk about parliamentary inquiry. That poor, sad half a page in Roberts under Section 33. And keep in mind, Section 33 of Roberts does not deal just with parliamentary inquiry. It's all the requests and inquiries. So again, parliamentary inquiry doesn't even get its own chapter. It gets half a page in the chapter that deals with parliamentary inquiry, requests for information, request for permission or leave to withdraw or modify a motion, request to read papers, and requests for any other privilege. So we won't spend too much time on parliamentary inquiry, but as I write about in notes and comments, unlike rising to a question of privilege, this is a motion that ought to be used more. Lots of people ought to rise to a parliamentary inquiry, and unfortunately, most new delegates have never heard of it, so they'll use something else instead. A parliamentary inquiry is how members are supposed to ask a question about parliamentary law or about the rules. And it has some wonderful uses, even though it's only a half a page in Roberts. In terms of the rules that govern it, once again, you can interrupt a speaker with a parliamentary inquiry if it's urgent. Almost never is it urgent. And so they almost always tend to get made between speakers and not right in the middle of someone speaking. There is no appeal from a parliamentary inquiry because it's just the chair answering a question like, hey, what's the vote that's going to be required on this motion to amend? Is it majority or is it two-thirds? And the chair can answer it. I will note in parliamentary inquiry that I actually find, let's see, I'm going to find this language, but I'm going to keep going at the same time. Oh, I didn't find the language I want, so I'm just going to keep going. It's not used enough, and the reason I say that is it's a nice person's point of order. And what do I mean by that? What I really mean is, and you've been to these meetings, something happens and somebody says, point of order. That motion should have been a two-thirds vote instead of a majority vote. That is correct. But it could have just as easily been done by a parliamentary inquiry, which would have been the nice way of asking the chair, Chair, that vote we just took, was that a majority vote or was that a two-thirds vote? Which gives the chair an opportunity to say, that's a two-thirds vote instead of majority vote. Thank you for asking the question. Point of order, as we're going to talk about, is a you did wrong, and a parliamentary inquiry allows you to ask very nicely, did you do wrong? So again, I sometimes see it used properly to ask a question that the delegate actually wants to know the answer to, but sometimes the parliamentary inquiry is used because it's nicely pointing out to the chair that perhaps a mistake of some kind has been made, and they very nicely want to bring it to the chair's attention instead of making a big scene about it. I did find the language that I wanted to in Notes and Comments, 5th edition, about parliamentary inquiry. May a parliamentary inquiry be used for purposes other than requesting information about procedure? Yes, parliamentary inquiry is a handy tool and should be used more often. 1. In place of a question of privilege, to make a request relating to the rights and privileges of the assembly or any of its members. Requests should be limited to the physical comfort and welfare of its members, such as reducing noise or distraction, adjusting the heat or air conditioning, or correcting the audio system. Two, in place of call for the orders of the day. To inquire of the assembly is following its agenda, program, or order of business. Three, when in doubt as to what motion to use or just plain lost or confused. Robert assigned this use to parliamentary inquiry with the caution, quote, a member has no right to ask a question on parliamentary law unless it is necessary in order to guide him in his action at that time. That's from parliamentary law. Within this limitation, when nothing seems to make sense, a member may raise a parliamentary inquiry to ask, Madam President, I'm lost, please help me. And the chair or parliamentarian will explain the parliamentary situation. And then, just like I said earlier, is there any strategic value in the use of parliamentary inquiry? Yes. A member who feels the chair has made an error may rise to a point of order, which means that the member disagrees with the chair. Because points of order seem harsher and can weaken the credibility of the chair, the member could instead use parliamentary inquiry to ask the chair if the procedure was correct. For example, a member believes that a speaker's debate is out of order and raises a parliamentary inquiry, quote, is the speaker's debate germane to the amendment? Indirect questioning is often preferable to confrontation. And so parliamentary inquiry, great motion. Most young delegates I meet have never heard of it. They know point of order, they know request for information. They do not know there is a thing such as a parliamentary inquiry. I will note, and we're going to talk about in a second, if you're following Sturgis or the AIP standard code, parliamentary inquiry is used for a lot more. And we're going to talk about that as we now slide into requests for information. Just as a parliamentary inquiry can be used to ask for procedural information, a request for information is how you ask for substantive information. It's how you ask the speaker or the chair a question about how much is something going to cost? This thing that we are discussing, how's it going to be implemented? How are the members of the committee that it's asking to create going to be named? You can ask questions about the motion that is being discussed, and they tend to be very factual. For those of you who've been around a while, you will recall that it used to be called point of information. That, of course, suggested that a member should get up and make a point during debate, which always ended up being debate rather than asking a question. So with the 11th edition of Roberts, the name was emphasized because it always been point of information and request for information. In fact, if you look at the original little Roberts, it was called a request for information originally. It became point of information later by people using it. And then in the 11th edition, they went back and emphasized the emphasis is on request because it's hard to say I have a request for information and then get up and debate. So the request for information makes it very clear that you're supposed to have a question, preferably a question you don't already know the answer to. I will mention that some excellent presiding officers I work with, when anyone says request for information, the very first phrase out of the chair's mouth is, what is your question? Because they want to force it into a question instead of, as you sometimes hear, 5 minutes of facts and then isn't it true? Or sometimes it's clearly just debate because a statement's going to get made and then they somehow have a question at the end. But for those chairs who always say, what is your question? It pretty much requires the person to put it in the form of a reporter's question, which is who, why, when, where, how. Oh, I left off what, who, what, when, where, how, why. You almost have to start it that way. And then it very clearly is a question. It also, because it's in the request, can interrupt if urgent. It's usually not. A little twist with it is if speakers are timed, actually the time for the question comes out of the speaker, not out of the questioner. In other words, if you do interrupt a speaker and say, I have a question, the chair would ask if the speaker is willing to be interrupted for the question. If the speaker says, yes, I am, well, that's coming out of their 2 minutes while the question gets asked and while the question gets answered. So it's something to be aware of, and it almost makes it better to ask at a time other than when someone is speaking. and not trying to force it into the 2 minutes or the 3 minutes that a speaker might have at a large convention. There is no appeal from a request for information, just as there is no appeal from a response to a parliamentary inquiry. And that's because it's just a question. No ruling has been made. And so Roberts makes clear that with like a parliamentary inquiry, for instance, if the member doesn't like what the answer is and decides to act a different way, the chair can call them to order, and then that could be appealed. But a request for information and the answer to a parliamentary inquiry are not appealable themselves because they are just questions. One thing I will note that's very important in terms of conventions, if you're in an election and you're starting the election process, as soon as the first person has gotten their ballot, as soon as the voting process has begun, as soon as that person has a ballot and might be writing on it, there can be no interruptions. That includes interruptions for requests for information. And so I do know, and you've seen too at some conventions where we're about to start an election, lots of questions, lots of questions. People won't stop asking questions that really don't need to be asked, and they need to get to the election. As soon as the chair says hand out the ballots and the voting starts, as soon as that starts, everything stops. And the reason is because you don't want to have an answer to a parliamentary inquiry, or you don't want to have an answer to a request for information while people are actually voting, because it might change their vote. They might go, oh, I didn't know that's what we were voting on. Let me change my vote from a yes to a no. So Roberts provides that as soon as voting starts, as soon as balloting starts, there are no requests for information. There are no parliamentary inquiries because it's simply not what is supposed to be done at that point. The problems with requests for information are legion, are legion. There are more misuses and errors, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional, of requests for information than any other points or requests that we're talking about tonight. And that's because requests for information get misused in about five different ways, or they cause about five different problems. And I'm gonna hop into them. One is, although it's probably not truly wrong procedurally, because Roberts does not try to look into people's minds. A request for information is not intended to ask a question you already know the answer to. It is used for that because sometimes the supporters of the person speaking want to ask questions so that they can keep answering what a great thing this proposal will be. But chairs need to watch that because that's not really the proper purpose of a request for information, was to get information, not to just sort of have more debate, which is all that is. That's the second misuse of the request for information, which is the isn't it true, where people will speak for a minute or for 2 minutes, or they'll begin with isn't it true and talk for a minute, which is really debate because it's not asking a question. And that's where that issue where I said the chair says, what is your question, can nip that in the bud near the beginning rather than letting someone go on and on and on about a question. Repetitive requests for information. Uh, One answer to a request for information tends to often be followed up by the same person with, can I have a follow-up? And can I have a follow-up? And I have another follow-up. And it changes from a request for information to interrogation, almost like a deposition. Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. There's a whole room full of people, and somehow we've gotten into just one person asking the speaker question after question after question about their motion. That tends to show poor preparation because this person could have probably contacted the person individually and found out the answers to the questions or done some research or read online. But instead, they want to use the time of all 1,000 delegates to have this one-on-one with the individual. Chair needs to watch that too. It's not unusual for a chair to let one follow up, but typically after that, they tell the person to get back in line or that that's as many questions as can be asked, and it tends to move on. There is an aspect of request for information that can also be abused, which is, unlike earlier when we talked about a question of privilege being in the order of precedence, request for information, a parliamentary inquiry, but mainly when it comes to requests for information are incidental motions. Incidental motions can conceivably be made after a motion to close debate, the previous question has been voted on and adopted because they're considered incidental and they are considered important enough that perhaps a question needs to be asked after debate closes. That's not a big deal in a group of 20 people because how many people are going to ask questions? But if you have a group of, for instance, as I do each July, 8,000 delegates, well, 1% is 80 people. 80 people is a lot of questions. So if 1% of the crowd wants to ask questions after debate has been closed, that would be 80 questions. That is not manageable. And in fact, I'd even say with a smaller audience, if you had 30 people, but you have one person who wants to keep asking questions after the close of debate, what do you do with that? Well, I see it done in a variety of ways, and I talk about that some in notes and comments because it does become an issue in very large conventions. I've seen motions be made to close debate and all requests for information with the idea of a two-thirds vote shutting all that down. I have seen motions to suspend the rules, to stop the asking of questions. All of those, of course, signify, and when they pass by a vote of 99% to 1%, that while a couple of people are happy to ask questions, you've really ticked off 99% of the room, and there needs to be a way to stop that. So different chairs handle that different ways. Typically, the idea is if you've already asked a question that's already been asked, can't have that again. Some chairs say if it deals with what we're voting on, they will allow that after the close of debate. But we're not going to allow you to ask a question that would let the maker of the motion speak because that just allows the debate to continue. In other words, envision debate's closed, but then I have a request for information. What's your request? Well, how would this motion help delegates save money? And if you call on the maker of the motion, they're just going to have some more debate. But debate's over because the previous question was adopted and debate is closed. So again, it just needs to be watched that you don't allow it to get out of hand. I put in notes and comments. Some conventions have rules that give priority to requests for information over debate. The intent is clear. Getting questions out of the way first facilitates debate. However, such a process can lead to situations where there are so many requests for information, often thinly veiled debate, that it is impossible to reach debate. Possible solutions include suspend the rules to end all requests for information, adopt a convention rule that allows adoption of the previous question to stop requests for information, adopt a convention rule that only allows so many requests for information before beginning debate, or that then provides that requests for information becomes a part of the debate rotation. Use the inherent authority of the chair to protect the assembly from obviously dilatory motions by refusing to recognize them and to enforce the rules relating to debate and those relating to orum and decorum by calling such members to order. And that's in Roberts in section 47, 7. The last misuse, which is a very specific exception, but I suspect some of you have seen it. Some groups use cards for recognition. You might have a green card to speak in favor. You might have a red card to speak against. Sometimes there is a yellow card to ask a question. And again, this tends to be used by groups that feel that questions are important and questions should be given priority. As a result, most groups that use the color cards, which are talked about in notes and comments, and I have some types of groups that's what they've always done long before I came along. What they tend to do is they tend to say, well, we will alternate pro and con debate, green, red, green, red, green, red. But if somebody raises a yellow card or a white card, if they're using the white card instead, and that's to ask a question, that person gets to jump ahead of the green and red. Meaning, if you have green, red, green, red, green, red, and a yellow card comes in, you would move the yellow card to the front of the list, meaning that'll get called on next. There's actually an article I wrote on my website called How to Avoid Yellow Card Hell. because if you use these cards in this fashion and you have 20 yellow cards come in, you're never going to get to the green and the red. You're just going to keep yelling on the questions or calling on the question and question and question and question. And that's why I said that some groups say that if you have this type of rotation, the rule is for the convention that we'll allow 3 or 5 yellow cards. We'll allow 3 or 5 questions, but then we will start the rotation of the green and the red, and then the questions will just go in order: green, red, yellow, green, red, yellow. And that's so that you can actually have debate. I have been with groups before where they had so many questions that the debate block expired before they started debate because there were so many questions. And so just keep in mind, if you're with a large body, to pay attention to the requests for information. Don't let them take over. Don't let them stop the real debate, because debate tends to be where most people find most of their information. Point of order. Someone earlier said they were on here to listen about point of order. Not going to talk too much about point of order because it's one of the ones that it's pretty straightforward, and I don't really, in 4 days before Christmas, want to get into the nitty gritty about whether or not a point of order adheres to the motion, it's not adhere to the motion, it's debatable, not debatable. So instead, I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights of point of order, which is in section 23 of Roberts. Point of order, of course, is the point that is made when someone feels that the rules have been violated. It can interrupt. The classic point of order is if you are in an 8,000 person assembly and somewhere in the back of the room you hear a little point of order, everything stops. Everything stops. And the chair would say, I think I heard a point of order. If there's a point of order, would the person please make their way to a microphone? They come up to the microphone. The chair would say, what is your point of order? And the person will say, my point of order is that we are beginning to debate a new motion and we never finish the old motion. And the reason there tends to be no need for a second with a point of order, there's no second, there's no debate, there's no vote, it's not amendable. Why? Because the chair is going to give one of two responses. Either the point of order is well taken, you are a brilliant parliamentarian. We did forget to vote on the last motion before we moved to this motion. So thank you very much. We will now go back and fix that by taking a vote on the prior motion. Then we will return to what we are dealing with now. Or the more likely response in most assemblies is the chair saying, you know, point of order is not well taken. Not sure where you were, but we took the voice by vote, and that was indecisive, and there was a division, and so there was a standing vote, and that was not decisive, and someone asked for, and there was a vote for a counted vote, and we counted the vote, and that vote is absolutely positively over. And so the point of order is not well taken. So the person's supposed to go sit down, or they could appeal from the decision of the chair, because that is a decision, unlike some of the requests we talked about earlier, like a request for information or a parliamentary inquiry. There was a big change made in the 11th edition. Well, I say big change. It seems like a big change in the parliamentary world. It's a very small change. But prior to the 11th edition, there were a variety of things that you could raise a point of order on. There's a list. And in fact, just so that I don't miss anything in it, says that there are 5 things that typically a point of order has to be made timely, has to be made at or about the time of the breach. And actually, that's a great rule. In fact, I will note, as a strange aside, a number of years ago, the North Carolina General Assembly and a few other states decided whether or not to adopt Roberts as the parliamentary authority for community associations, for homeowner associations, for condominium associations. And one of the biggest concerns I heard from attorneys is, we don't want to have to learn parliamentary procedure, and we don't want to have to deal with all these minutia of Roberts. One of the things that I've heard almost without exception is that the attorneys love that points of order have to be made timely, and that if they're not, much like an objection in a trial, that they tend to be waived. That's been very popular. And the reason, which I hadn't really thought about, but it wasn't uncommon back in the day for the next meeting of, say, a homeowners association. One of the issues was, well, I think we did something wrong in our last meeting. Before we start this meeting, let's talk about what was done wrong at the last meeting and let's see if we can resolve that problem. And of course, Robert says most procedural issues have to be raised immediately or they are waived. You are done with them. And so the attorneys love the fact that most procedural issues get put to rest with a point of order unless you raise it immediately. There are a couple of exceptions. And those exceptions, according to Roberts, are that the times where you do not have to raise a point of order immediately, in other words, they survive, it is a continuing point of order, are one, a main motion has been adopted that conflicts with the bylaws of or constitution of the organization. B, a main motion has been adopted that conflicts with a main motion previously adopted and still in force, unless you got a high enough vote that it's the equivalent of rescinding or amending something previously adopted. Any action that has been taken in violation of applicable procedural rules prescribed by federal, state, or local law. D, any action that has been taken in violation of a fundamental principle of parliamentary law. There are not a lot of those, but occasionally there is mention in Roberts of something being a fundamental principle, like only members are allowed to vote. You can allow absentees to vote. And so those would be things that would be continuing objections. Any action that has been taken in violation of a rule protecting absentees. The change that got made in the 11th edition was prior to that, you could raise a point of order that a motion would be in violation of law. And without turning this into a legal seminar or spending far more time on it than we want. In fact, Jonathan Jacobs just had an article in the latest National Parliamentarian about this. But it used to be a point of order, or you could raise an objection that we can't pass this motion because there's a law or a statute out there that this would violate. We can't say that we want the building code to be this because we can't do this because a law would be violated if we did it. Robert said it's not the place of an assembly to figure out whether or not something is a law or not. It's also not a situation where you might want a situation where you want to pass something specifically to make the point that is a violation of law. The way Roberts got changed is now you can raise a point of order if there's a statute involved, only if it's a procedural statute. In other words, and it's much smaller, if there's a statute that says votes in a particular type of organization have to be by ballot, and the vote was not taken by ballot, that would be something that could be raised, and that's a statutory issue. Most of the time, though, now Roberts does not care about statutes and laws. It's only if there is a specific procedural law that deals with what we're dealing with. In terms of other authorities that I just want to touch on for a second, because I know we tend to focus a lot on Roberts whenever we talk about these, but I want to touch on a couple of the other books because some of the people at this meeting, either you may deal with one of these other parliamentary authorities, or it's just good to know about them because they're out there. When it comes to questions of privilege, as I said earlier, Sturgis is basically the same, whether you're talking about Sturgis True or if you're talking about the AIP Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure. The questions of privilege are treated pretty much the same in both of these books as they are in Roberts. I mentioned that in Demeter, it goes into a little bit about what is a question of privilege supposed to pertain to, and it's SHIP, safety, health, integrity, protection of personal property. One book where you will get a lot more information on requests for questions of privilege is Mason. Mason, of course, is a legislative book, and it has pages about questions of privilege. It talks about what they are. It goes into the different types. I talked about earlier that there are questions of privilege of the assembly, and then there are questions of personal privilege. Well, Mason actually has a whole section just on what are privileges of the assembly, privileges of the House. Some of the questions that are recognized as questions of privilege of the House are as follows. A, questions concerning organization of the House. B, questions concerning expelling or censuring a member or the member's capacity to serve. C, call of the House when a quorum is present. D, comfort of the members. E, freedom from disturbance. F, disorderly conduct of members. G, H, I mean, it keeps going. And so Mason has a lot of information on questions of privilege affecting the assembly and of the person if you are interested in learning more that's out there. Parliamentary inquiry. Parliamentary inquiry is treated fairly similarly in both True Sturgis and in the AIP Standard Code. One big difference, though, and that is that request for information is not a separate motion in Sturgis or in the AIP Standard Code. There is no request for information. Instead, request for information is part of a parliamentary inquiry. So in a Sturgis environment, you can raise a parliamentary inquiry and you can ask anything, whether it's a procedural question or whether it's a question about the motion. So it's not a separate motion with separate rules. So in terms of request for information, that's a Roberts thing. It's a Demeter thing. It's not a Sturgis or an AIP Sturgis because it's not a separate motion. As we start to wrap up here, and I'm happy to take questions or ask about anything, it's certainly worth asking, do we need all these different things? Do you need request for question of privilege? Do we need parliamentary inquiry? Do we need request for information? Do we need point of order? I mean, several parliamentary authorities have tried to combine these into one. And that's fine to think about, but it's just not what Robert has done. I mean, they are separate motions. And so I would argue, and there's some articles on our website about this, that newer members do need to be made aware of the differences between these. And again, the differences tend to be that a question of privilege is that I have something that is preventing me from fully participating in this meeting. Something's been said wrong about me, or I can't hear, or the screens aren't working, or the lights aren't working. And so please, Chair, help me figure out how to make this meeting better than it is right now. It almost never translates into a motion unless it's to go into closed session. A parliamentary inquiry is supposed to be a specific question about procedure, and it's not nearly used enough. It's a great motion. People should not be confused in assemblies. And so by asking the chair, it can be explained. And as I mentioned also, it's a nice way to ask if you think there's been a procedural violation, because then the chair can answer it rather than feel that they are being attacked. Requests for information, when used properly, are to give the maker of the request for information they don't already have that they need to get from the maker. Unfortunately, the motion's used wrong more than it seems to be used right. And finally, a point of order is how you bring attention to the fact that something has been done wrong. And then the chair can say your point is either well taken or it's not well taken, and the chair will handle it. Altogether, these are good motions. They all serve a particular purpose when you're following Robert. And so I would encourage everybody to take a look at each of the chapters I've just mentioned. The nice thing about these motions, if you want to leave this meeting and go read the section on parliamentary inquiry and Robert, it will take you 30 seconds. And that's because it's half a page. It's just half a page. So it's not nearly like going and trying to read amendments and all the different types of amendments and how they work together and the rules on amending amendments, or reconsider that goes on for 22 pages. Most of these motions are digestible, but I would suggest in getting to the sexy motions, don't hop over these and ignore them, figuring you already know everything about them. Take a look at them because they do serve a purpose. And with that, Barbara, I'm happy to just have a general chat about things, or I'm happy to take questions if any have popped up that you know about.
Hey, thank you for an excellent presentation, educational presentation where you used examples. You went through the four, raise your question of privilege, parliamentary inquiry, request for information, and point of order. And you demonstrated the value of your Toastmaster skills by using your gestures, your pace, your pitch, your eye contact. It means a lot. And it really makes a big difference when you teach and explain parliamentary procedure to use those other skills for people to get the most benefit from it. So let's take a few moments and ask if anyone has any questions. And we're going to start with David. His hand's up. David.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Jim, as always. Great job. Always enjoy seeing you. You must have talked to Burke Balch because he has told me the same thing. He does not use point of order. He uses parliamentary inquiry so that it is not you made a mistake. It's how is this properly supposed to be handled? And I've relearned that from you. Thank you.
I appreciate that, David. I had not heard that from Burke, but it doesn't surprise me because I think he'd take the nice approach rather than the "you're wrong" approach.
But I do have one thing I'm a little perplexed or puzzled. Um, Once the ballots are in people's hands and they are starting to vote, you indicated that a point of a request for information is not in order. And maybe this is a far out scenario, but let's say that the directions were you will receive a ballot, put an X on the line for the candidate you wish, fold your ballot once and drop it in the ballot box. That's the instruction. And you look to the person to your right, not that you're copying their vote, but you notice that they use a check mark rather than an X, and they have folded their ballot 2 times. And to try to protect them, I would say, request for information. Could you please repeat the directions for marking or point of request for information? What happens if somebody puts a check mark rather than an X? You try to help during the voting itself. So how could you handle something where a mistake seems to be in the offing?
Good question, David, which doesn't surprise me because you know this stuff really well. I have seen conventions where the chair, in attempting to clarify something, like during a vote, just was disastrous. And that's because some people have already submitted their ballots and they'd walked back to their seats, or they'd already dropped their ballots in a box, or they'd done something that could not be undone. I'm not saying you can't address it. I'm just saying pay attention. And you didn't ask for it, but I knew you'd want the language in Roberts, so I pulled it up. In section 45(6), interruption of votes. When a vote is being taken, no interruption is permitted from the time that any member has actually voted until all have presumably voted, unless, as sometimes occurs in balloting, other business is being transacted during voting. But that's not the what we're talking about. What I often hear, David, to address your situation is the chair will say, if somebody tries to raise a point of order, or if they try to raise a request for information after the balloting has begun, and by that I mean, for instance, ballots have been handed out in envelopes to people and they're being distributed around the room. Some people are voting, and somebody says, I have a question. The chair will say, there is no interruption of the vote once we have begun. If you have a problem, come to the stage. And the people come to the stage, and 90% of the time, their problem is their problem. They don't understand something, or they are having an issue, or they don't quite know what they're doing, and that can get solved at the stage. We can tell them what's going on. If what they bring up is the ballots aren't right, that would stop the election. But the chair would announce it and say what's going on, and we're going to have to fix things. So it would get fixed. The language in Roberts, though, seems to be aimed at stopping in the middle of a vote while people are voting, the chair starting a discussion with someone that could impact how people are voting in either the election or on the motion. So we would just ask that it be brought to the front rather than to interrupt the voting.
Well put. Thank you, Jim.
Mhm.
Okay, there's a request in the chat. Could you please repeat the meaning of the acronym SHIP?
Yes, here I can pull it up. I don't want to misquote Demeter in any way, but it's safety, health, integrity, and protection of property. And if that seems weird, it's because it kind of is. Demeter was writing at a time where that language might have made a little more sense than it does now. But of course, Demeter has a number of things, including like coexisting main motions. So the only reason I mentioned Demeter is it's a bit of it gets into some specifics on some motions and talks about some things and has some great mnemonics. So there's some nice things in it. But in terms of raise a question of privilege, Demeter says in enlightened parliamentary practice, a question of privilege implies that the member raising it will reveal some matter which concerns the rights and privileges of the members collectively or individually. Questions of privilege question of privilege relates in a broad interpretation to the following subjects: the member's safety, health, or integrity, or protection of their property. Catchword SHIP, ship. When a member rises to a question of privilege or personal privilege and is asked to state it, he is expected to reveal or point out something concerning these four subjects, namely the subject's ship.
Very good. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Please raise your hand. If you can't find the icon at the bottom of your screen, it's Alt Y. Does anyone have any questions or comments they would like to share with us? Again, this was an excellent presentation. I really appreciate you showing us the books as you referenced them so we could see what they look like. That was very helpful. On the humor, yellow card health was fantastic. Counting on your fingers. These are all little things that we discuss and we are encouraged to practice. That does help make a message memorable. All right. Does anyone have any questions at all for us this evening? Jim, we appreciate your time and your expertise. And I know many of us, including myself, are going to be looking for those stocking stuffers. If not for my friends, for my own stocking. Thank you for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it. All right. Guests, you are welcome to leave at this time. Gail, did you have something you wanted to share with us?
Would you mind if I did a quick commercial? Because the unit that I am president of in Las Vegas is offering an 8-week, hour-and-a-half course in comprehensive parliamentary procedure, which includes both beginning stuff as well as advanced material. It's 8 weeks starting the week after the Super Bowl, because we knew people wouldn't come then, on Sunday afternoons at 2 o'clock Pacific time, which is, of course, 3 hours later on the East Coast. And the cost is $0. So anyone who would like that 8-week, 1 hour-and-a-half session is welcome to contact me. I'm in the chat with my email address, and you can register. We will take the first 500 people because the last time we offered this, it went over 500 people. So we will take the first 500 people who register for the class. It's 8 hour-and-a-half sessions.
Yeah, can I ask if that will qualify for CEU credits?
We are asking for it. The last time they refused us because they said it was too basic, and some of it is too basic. So I'm hoping that I'm giving them more material this time as we're asking for CEU credits and asking them to look at, yes, we're going to do things that are very basic, like the ranking motions. We're going to not assume anything, but we're also doing preferential voting. So that's certainly an advanced topic.
Okay, well, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Penelope.
I don't have a question. I do have a question. I still need information from a couple of our participants. If you need CEU credit, I'm missing some information from Betty, from Jerry, from Hattie Harris, from Maureen McNamara, for Vera Tony. And Virginia Harris, I put a direct chat to you because I can't understand your number. I also wanted to say that our Sunday forums will continue on the third Sunday of the month. And we are very excited. It's lovely that David will be with us. I have you actually down for May rather than April. If your schedule is he still on the line? Maybe not.
I don't think so.
Okay, well then he's speaking in May. So we will be having him speak. His presentation is Snow White and the Seven Unique Motions. In March, we will be having a parliamentary responsibility session on March 15th by Judge Patty Titus. So and all of you who are here tonight will be on our list for announcements for future Sunday forums and our regular club meetings, which we would love to tell you more about. And if you do not wish to be on the list, all you have to do is reply and say, please take me off. And I promise we do respect that. Thank you very much. But the people that I
Hello.
mentioned, yes,
Hello, Penelope. This is Virginia Harris.
yes,
May I give you my number now?
yes,
My
please. I
ID
couldn't,
number?
yeah,
Okay, it's 11688.
okay. But you also had a 115 there. I just didn't know what the 115 was all about. Thank you.
I know
I-
I typed it incorrectly and I tried to correct it. So,
It's
but
okay.
it's
Got you now.
11688.
Got it.
Okay,
Got it.
thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hattie Harris. Just let me know what email address you normally use. Maureen, thank you for your answer.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Everyone is invited to join Virtual Parliamentarians. We do have monthly meetings on the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock. The focus for the meeting is on parliamentary skills, which you witnessed how effective Jim Slaughter was tonight in his presentation. And then we do have a 20-minute lesson, if you want to call it, on parliamentary procedure. And then we have a mock meeting, 20-minute practice where we practice making motions and using motions and stacking motions, which is always a lot of fun. So always feel welcome to join us. And that's in addition to our Sunday forum, which is open to guests. Okay, any questions? Okay, I want to wish everyone a happy holiday season. I'm going to ask our board members, our executive committee members, to please stay online for our executive committee meeting. And I hope to see you all at our future Sunday forums or meetings in 2026. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Vera, is Vera gone already? She's gone. Okay.
I should be able to find those numbers.
Okay. I'll let you know the ones I'm still missing. Thank you.
And Virginia Harris, thank you for coming.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Barbara, this is Joyce Brown Watkins. I just want to make sure I should stay on.
This is,
Or
are
no?
you on that's for our FSAP meeting.
Okay. All right.
This is Toastmasters Virtual Parliamentary.
Toastmasters.
You're
Okay.
welcome to join us. You're welcome to join us, but tonight it's a different group. And yes, I do
Okay.
both.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was a little puzzled there for a moment.
Yeah, no.
I
All
thought it
right.
was Toastmasters, but
Yeah, no. That's
yeah.
FSAP. So keep warm.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much. And have a
All right.
blessed
We'll see you
holiday,
next month.
everyone.
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. And Virginia, did you have anything else?